Before you dive in, hit like, subscribe, and tell me which country you're watching from. This is the story of a lonely mechanic who had never known love until an Apache woman rode into his life and changed his heart forever. One ride, one touch. And everything shifted. Let's get started. The desert highway stretched endlessly, shimmering under waves of heat as Ethan Rivers pushed his old Yamaha through the dust. At 27, he had never known a woman's touch. Not because he feared intimacy, but because he never believed anyone would want to share that closeness with him. Life on the outskirts of Flagstaff was quiet, predictable, and safely distant from affection. That was how he liked it, or at least how he convinced himself he liked it. But everything changed the moment he saw her standing alone on the roadside. A silhouette sharp against the blazing Arizona sun, she appeared almost like a mirage, tall, poised, her long raven black hair caught in the desert wind like strands of night. Her dress held traditional Apache patterns, earthy and proud, telling a story without words. When Ethan slowed the bike, she stepped forward urgently. Her eyes, dark, fierce, and startlingly alive, met his with a boldness that tightened his chest. "My name is Tala," she said, voice steady despite the heat. "My horse ran." He panicked and bolted toward the canyon. If I don't catch him soon, he could die out there. Ethan nodded quickly, wanting to help but barely managing speech. Her presence unnerved him in a way that wasn't fear, it was recognition. Before he could offer to search, she closed the distance between them, closer than any woman had ever dared stand. Her breath brushed his collarbone as she asked softly, "May I ride with you?" The simple question struck him harder than the sun. No woman had ever asked to sit behind him, to hold him, to trust him. His voice cracked. Yeah. Of course. Climb on." And she did, without hesitation, her hands wrapped around his waist with firm warmth, not timid, not flirtatious, just confident, grounded, real. Ethan felt every beat of her heart against his back as he revved the engine. The feeling wasn't seductive. It was ancient, like something older than the desert itself. As they sped across the burning landscape, he felt her breath steadying him, her grip anchoring him in a world he never realized he'd been drifting through alone. They reached the canyon edge where the land split into layers of red stone and silence. Ethan slowed, scanning the terrain until he spotted a chestnut horse drinking from a narrow stream below. Tala slid off the bike, but she didn't release him immediately. Her hand lingered on his shoulder, and when he turned, he saw something in her eyes that made the hot air thicken gratitude, certainty, and something deeper he couldn't name. Tala approached the horse calmly, whispering in Apache until the animal lowered its head into her hands. Ethan expected her to celebrate or thank him and walk away. Instead, she turned and studied him with a quiet intensity that pinned him in place. "You ride with courage," she said softly, "but you carry loneliness like a shadow." Ethan stiffened. No one had ever read him so accurately, so gently. She stepped closer. "You're strong, but alone can become too heavy if no one shares the path with you." Her fingers brushed the front of his shirt, not a romantic gesture, but an honest one, grounded in her people's way of communicating truth through touch. Ethan didn't pull back. He couldn't. Something in him long dormant stirred awake. For the first time in his life, someone had truly seen him, not the quiet mechanic, not the polite guy who kept to himself, but the man beneath, the one who feared he'd never be enough for anyone to choose. The sun dipped lower, painting the canyon gold as Tala stepped even closer. Her hand rested fully on his chest, right over his heartbeat. "You helped me without hesitation," she said. "Most men offer strength but hide their hearts. You don't know it yet, but there's a fire in you too." Ethan didn't know what to say. Words felt too small for what washed through him: shyness, awe, and something dangerously close to hope. He expected her to walk away with her horse, to disappear back into the desert the same mysterious way she'd appeared. Instead, Tala took a slow step toward him, closer than before, her breath warm against his jaw. "Ride with me again?" she asked, voice calm but carrying a softness that shook him. It wasn't a request for help. It was an invitation into something he had never experienced, a connection. A possibility, a story not yet written. Ethan felt the weight of his answer, though she didn't pressure him. She waited. Truly waited. And something inside him rose from the dust courage he didn't know he had, longing he had always tried to hide. He nodded, not in hesitation but in certainty. Yes, he whispered. I'll ride with you anywhere. Tala's eyes brightened, not with triumph but with understanding. As though she had expected his soul to answer before his voice ever did, she led her horse to the trailer, while he steadied the bike. But her gaze kept returning to him with a quiet connection that made his breath unsteady. When she returned to stand beside him, the sun setting behind her, she didn't speak. She simply placed 2 fingers under his chin, lifted it gently, and met his eyes with a promise unspoken. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. And in that moment, Ethan Rivers, the man who thought he would spend his life untouched, finally understood that the desert had brought him someone meant to change everything. When she stepped back, she gave a small, warm smile. Not bold, not seductive, just honest. Tomorrow, she said. I'll meet you here. Ethan nodded again, unable to stop smiling back. Tala mounted her horse, the dying sunlight turning her silhouette into something almost sacred. As she rode away across the canyon rim, Ethan stood. Still, heart racing, realizing he wasn't the same man who had driven down this road an hour ago. Something had shifted. Something had awakened. And for the first time in his life, as the desert embraced the coming night, Ethan didn't feel alone. He felt chosen. He felt seen. And he knew, without question, that he would be waiting at this exact spot when the sun rose again, ready to ride wherever Tala asked him to go. Ethan arrived early, long before the sun cleared the canyon rim. He waited beside the trail with the restless energy of a man who feared hope more than heartbreak. What if he'd imagined the connection? What if Tala had simply shown kindness to a lonely stranger? Those doubts circled him like vultures. But when he finally saw her walking toward him, calm, graceful, smiling as if she'd known he'd be there, every doubt melted into the dust. You came back, he breathed. Tala touched his arm lightly. Our paths crossed for a reason, Ethan Rivers. I don't ignore signs like that. She climbed onto the bike without hesitation, slipping her arms around him in that grounding embrace he had thought of all night. But this time her cheek rested against his back with gentle familiarity, as though she belonged there, as though she had always belonged there. Ethan wasn't stiff or nervous like yesterday. He let himself feel the warmth of her closeness, the trust in her touch, the steady rhythm of her breath. Together they rode deeper into reservation land, passing red cliffs, sagebrush plains, and the whispering winds of stories older than memory. When they stopped at the cliffside lookout, the world below unfolded in colors that looked more like a painting than a place. Layers of crimson, gold, and shadow carved by centuries. Ethan stood breathless, but his awe shifted when Tala stepped beside him. She studied him with a tenderness he wasn't used to receiving. Your eyes change here, she murmured. You look less lost? Before he could reply, she reached up and brushed a loose strand of hair from his forehead. A gesture so simple yet so intimate that it left him motionless. You've never known a woman's touch, she said softly. Not as judgment? Not as curiosity? As understanding? Ethan's pulse thundered. He didn't know how she saw him so clearly, but she did every guarded corner, every unspoken fear. That doesn't make you weak, she continued. It makes you honest. Ethan lowered his gaze, shame tugging at him. I just never felt worthy of anyone choosing me. Tala's fingers rose beneath his chin, lifting his head with a gentleness that made his eyes sting. Worthiness isn't granted by others, she whispered. It's uncovered within yourself. The desert wind wrapped around them, warm and forgiving. She took his hand slowly, giving him time to pull away if he wanted. He didn't. She guided his trembling fingers to her cheek. Ethan froze at the softness of her skin beneath his palm. Tala leaned into his touch, letting him feel the warmth of her breath, the steadiness of her heartbeat beneath her calm exterior. No rush, no pressure, just presence. Closeness isn't something to fear, she murmured. And you don't owe me anything. But if you want to learn connection, I can teach you gently, with patience, with spirit. Something in Ethan cracked open something he'd kept buried for years. It wasn't desire or hunger. It was belonging. She pressed her forehead to his, an Apache gesture of deep trust. Their breaths mingled, warm and slow. Two souls sharing silence. Sharing air. Ethan felt his hand steady, his fear dissolve in the warmth of her presence. She didn't push him away, didn't judge his uncertainty. She simply existed with him, completely and fearlessly. "What do you want, Ethan?" she asked softly, her voice carrying the weight of choice. Not expectation. He swallowed hard, the honesty rising through him like a tide he couldn't resist. "I want to ride with you," he whispered. "Not just today. Not just until you find your horse. For as long as you'll have me." Tala's eyes softened and a slow smile spread across her lips, one filled not with flirtation but with understanding, recognition and quiet joy. "And stay," she said gently. That single word carried 1,000 meanings. Stay present. Stay brave. Stay connected. Stay with me. And Ethan knew instantly that he would. He had already chosen her long before he realized it. They walked along the cliff's edge together, moving in unspoken rhythm. She told him stories of her ancestors, of warriors who valued honor above strength, of women whose spirits guided their people, of love that was chosen freely and never forced. Ethan listened, absorbing every word, feeling the weight of her culture and the privilege of being invited into it. At one point she slipped her hand into his, not boldly, not shyly, but naturally, as if it was the most effortless thing in the world. His fingers curled around hers, steadier than before. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows, Tala led him to a circle of stones etched with old symbols. "This place is sacred," she said quietly. "I've never brought anyone here." Ethan felt the significance pierce straight through him. He wasn't just a stranger now. He wasn't simply a man who helped her on the roadside. He was someone she trusted, someone she welcomed into the spaces of her heart. She sat beside him on the warm stone and leaned her head on his shoulder. Ethan didn't flinch. He let himself be held. He let himself exist without fear. When she finally lifted her head, the fading sunlight glowed in her eyes. "You have a gentle spirit," she said. "Most men hide theirs, but you wear yours openly, even when you don't realize it." Ethan felt emotion tighten his chest. No one had ever spoken to him like this. Number